All right, so now we're going to get into the session. So Kyle Demes is, he lives in BC and he works for OpenAlex and I had his whole bio, but now I can't figure out how to see my speaker notes on this Zoom. So I'm just going to tell you something that I know about him. I think we met when he came to our campus when he was working for a different company, Elsevier at that time. And then we went out for lunch, and always those things are always a bit nerve-wracking because you don't know what the person's going to be like, and if you're going to have to use all your skills as in small talk, and sometimes it can be a bit painful. But with Kyle, it was great. So right from the get-go, I liked him. And then last year, we were both at Cara, and he told me about this food, which is called boiled peanuts. And I had never heard of this. Apparently, oh, there's a funny thing on this can. It is the South's favorite snack. So, anyways, and then I went to the States right after that, and I saw this at Walmart. So I bought it, but I didn't have the nerve to eat it. But then I went to Charleston in November when things were still somewhat normal with our neighbor to the south, and I got some boiled peanuts, and they are delicious. They really my my memory of it is that you really are reminded that peanuts are a legume. So when you're eating it, they're kind of soft, kind of like a bean, anyways. But delicious snack. So thanks to Kyle, I was introduced to a new food item. So that always makes me happy. And with that, that's it from me. And Kyle is going to take over.
Thank you so much, Thane, and Talene for organizing. But Thane, I must say that is probably the most interesting and exciting intro I've ever had. And I love it because people are going to remember me with boiled peanuts now. And it is one of my favorite foods. So I like that. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. While I'm doing that, I had a quick look at the participants. I always love doing webinars in Canada because I've gotten to interact with so many of you over the years in different capacities and some new faces and names for me as well. Can someone just confirm that they see my slides? Okay, great. So I put there's a QR code and a short URL if you want to access the slides. I'll make sure that Talene and Thane have the link as well, and they can circulate it afterwards so that you can have access to all the slides. Like Thane mentioned, I do want this to be somewhat interactive. It's better for me and it's better for you in that situation. I have prepared what I will do in the event that no one wants to be interactive and they just want to sit, but I hope it won't be that way. But just to give you a sense of what to expect, I want to do some quick introductions to me and you. I've got a QR code I'm going to give you in a moment for a Google form just to get a little bit of information on you. And then I have some slides on an overview of OpenAlex and using it for research analytics, and then some guided tutorials. Now, a few folks did send me in advance things that they wanted to see, and I'll make sure to include those. But when I get to the guided tutorial, that's a really good time to ask me how to do anything at all that you want to see, because I'll have it open and it'll be really easy to do that. In the first part, it'll be really good to chime into the chat with anything that is related to a topic that you think is relevant, but isn't necessarily showing things in OpenAlex. And I'll leave it to you to sort of moderate that yourself. If everybody just wants to talk philosophy of bibliometrics, maybe that's what we do, but I think most people would like to see sort of the practical components. Okay, so introducing me, and Thane did a great job, but I'll just add, I'm formerly a marine ecologist. That's my academic training, and I turned research administrator about 10 years ago. I was senior strategy advisor for the vice president of research at UBC, and then director of large-scale research development at Simon Fraser University. And then I worked with governments and institutions as a consultant around Canada for Elsevier research intelligence. In everything I've done, both as a scientist, a research administrator, and now with OpenAlex, my passion is trying to figure out how we can inform decisions using data. So that gives a sense of me. I'm basically the same person, although you can see my hair has changed quite a bit. And just a quick introduction to OurResearch. If you haven't heard of it, I know probably a lot in this community have, but Heather Pivovar and Jason Priam were the co-founders. I think they're legends in the bibliometric and library communities. But they started this nonprofit, I think 13 or 14 years ago now. And the whole idea was, let's advance open science with technological solutions. And some of those solutions are Unpaywall, which I think most people know, Unsub, Impact Story. But today I'm going to be talking about the latest and greatest, OpenAlex. So just a quick QR code and Google form for you to tell me a little bit about yourself. There's just 4 quick questions, and I'll go to those in a moment. But What describes your institution? So are you a university, a hospital, funder, that sort of thing. To what extent you collect or analyze data in your role. So do you do it all the time, or do you almost never use it and you're just here to learn what people are doing? What you spend most of your time doing with that. Are you helping researchers do research? Are you helping researchers with tenure and promotion? Are you helping the library with collections? That sort of thing. And then just finally, how familiar with OpenAlex are you? So on the one end, I think you're the company that launched ChatGPT, and then on the other end, Kyle, I've seen every single webinar you've ever done. So hopefully folks are filling that out. It looks like they are. Talene or Thane, can one of you confirm that you see the new Google form? Okay, great. So as these are coming in, just quickly seeing, so we have a lot of academic institutions, which is usually what I end up speaking to, but some research hospital, government as well. Very little from private sector. And then to what extent do you collect data? So very few people are doing this sort of off the side of their desk. It looks like most people are doing it about half time of the role, and then on, more than half time as well. So that's good to know and interesting to see. In your work with metadata, what activity do you spend the most time doing? Okay, so we've got most people helping the institution guide institutional strategy and operations. That is interesting to me. I came from a research office where we did a lot of that work with the research office, and it wasn't always through the library. And so I think this is a really interesting shift we're starting to see, is that the library is supporting the institution as well. And people helping researchers. So pretty much split through everything except someone added institutional repository. That's a good one. Okay, good. It's a pretty diverse crowd. And then finally, how familiar are you with OpenAlex? So a few people looks like very little, and then most people about half. So maybe you've started to look at it, but you haven't watched all of my webinars yet. All right, that's a good spot for us to be in for this. Thanks for filling that out. Okay. So introducing OpenAlex, I'm going to do a quick overview of what OpenAlex is and why you need to have this context, and then we'll go through sort of the basics of how to use it. From a really high level, we like to think about things through a lens of research intelligence. If you collect data on research activities, you can use that data to inform actions. And sometimes that's just finding the exact right paper when there's close to 10 million papers a year. And sometimes that's helping a country figure out which countries they're going to collaborate with, that sort of thing. So all of those fit into this same idea. And there's a lot of robust intelligence frameworks for every single sector. The academic sector is one that is lagging considerably because we have this one foundational challenge where institutions don't get data on their research outputs. Every other company, sector, organization you look at has at least an inventory of their work. That hasn't happened historically with institutions. And importantly, that was part of the process. So you see this little graphic here. Researchers publish independent of their bosses. Their boss doesn't get to decide what they publish. The academic community at large does. And that's a really important part of science for trust and peer review. But it also means that publishers don't necessarily have to tell universities every time their researchers publish. So to solve this sort of foundational problem, scientific knowledge graphs collect information about all of the pieces of the research ecosystem. So I have as an example here, this is one of my papers. You can see the abstract, where it was published, what year it was published in, the title, the authors, what institutions they're at, citations, related documents. All of these things are different nodes in the knowledge graph that we're connecting to one another. So this work is connected to this author and this publisher and this institution. And you can see sort of the counts of what we have in OpenAlex right now for each of those. Some SKG examples. If you haven't heard the term SKG or scientific knowledge graph, you definitely know some of these at least. Web of Science, Scopus, Google Scholar with a question mark because it's a little bit different, Dimensions, Microsoft Academic Graph, and OpenAlex. So this is sort of the bucket to think about OpenAlex within. But some important differentiators, first and foremost, broader coverage than any other SKG. And this is really our entire mission, is to have all of the world's scholarly knowledge. We don't have it yet. We have more than any other knowledge graph, but we're nowhere close, we don't think. So that's a big thing that we're always focusing on, is what research is missing and how do we get it. And just as a note here, ALEX is short for Alexandria. the Library of Alexandria, which was meant to house and index all the world's knowledge. It's also famous for burning down. We spend a lot of time creating a robust sustainability plan for open infrastructure to make sure we don't. I can talk about that later if you're interested, but did want to tell you why we think of our name that way. There is not as many publications that have come out comparing OpenAlex to other data sets. Scopus and Web of Science have hundreds of papers that have compared them, but OpenAlex is only a couple years old. But a few examples sort of highlight these important differences. So this one on the left shows the DOIs in Scopus, Web of Science, and OpenAlex. We have lots of works without DOIs as well, but it's an easy place to start. And you can see Scopus and Web of Science have largely the same works, and then OpenAlex has another 30 million that aren't getting into any of these. And we can talk more about where those come from if people are interested, but to show you another example of why that's important, this in the middle is a screenshot from the Leiden rankings open version, and they compared on the bottom their Web of Science rankings, and on the y-axis the OpenAlex rankings. And you can see all universities are much higher, so there's broader coverage. And in this particular example, I was looking at Australia, social science and humanities. So you can see a lot of that work is being driven by increased coverage in these fields that aren't getting into the other databases. Largely, though, you see the rankings are pretty much the same, which is an interesting finding. You can see some universities actually outperform others when you include social science and humanities. I was at Simon Fraser University, and they're a great example. They're a social science forward university, and in traditional rankings, they don't do as well as when you include all of that work that they're leaders in. Just another interesting paper to throw out from all Canadian authors. I'm a co-author on this paper. You can see what happens if you take all of Scopus and then you take OpenAlex and reduce it to just what's in Scopus and you do a ranking, you get almost the exact same results. So it's a really interesting way of thinking about that. Most people don't want to take the things out that aren't in Scopus, but if you did want to do that, that's something that you could do. I see a couple questions about Semantic Scholar and Lens. Yeah, I think Lens is definitely an SKG. I mean, they're very similar and they use us as a data source for that. Semantic Scholar, I'd have to think a little bit more about that. They're definitely helping people find that research, and they use our data as well, but I'm not sure that they have all the same functionality. Okay. And there's just one more point I want to make on coverage, and I don't want to belabor this too much, but this is two recent papers that were comparing open access coverage in OpenAlex versus these traditional databases. And you can see in this one on the top left, this large bar here are all the journals that are open access that are only in OpenAlex. So 25,000. And these two over here on the right, oh yes. And these two over here on the right, or three on the right, are the ones that aren't in OpenAlex. So a few hundred. Just to give you a sense that really a lot of the open access literature in the world isn't getting into these databases. There's another graph below that that shows bias. So anything above 1 is bias for, and anything below 1 is bias against. And so you can see for Scopus and Web of Science, you have bias for these, bias for the high income countries and bias against low income, whereas OpenAlex, you've got a much broader representation that's less biased. Just a final example on the right, comparing the African research publications in Scopus, Web of Science, and OpenAlex, and you can see that OpenAlex has quite a bit more than all of these, including the AJOL. So it is really important to keep in mind this is a much more comprehensive database, but the other important feature is that it's completely open. And this is really another differentiator for OpenAlex. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I put this in here as a reminder because it's really important. So the Barcelona Declaration started just over a year ago, and it's already got 100 university funders around the world who have signed on, basically committing to only using open research metadata in anything for decisions and research. So it's a really important principle that is shaping the bibliometric market in most of the world. It's been lagging in North America, but I put this in here as a reminder that the first North American university just signed last month, and it was a Canadian university, Simon Fraser University, so I had to make sure to give them a big shout out. But the types of things people are doing, like open rankings, governments, the French government is committing to only using OpenAlex, and Financial Times covered Sorbonne canceling their Web of Science contract and things like that. But you need sort of a solution to be able to use. You can't just commit in principle and then not have any data source. So that's where we come in. Some of the reasons that people aren't using these closed ones are the subscriptions are costly. Everybody knows that. Results can't be shared. So if you're a researcher studying research itself or doing a systematic review, you can't share your underlying data. Or if you're a government making decisions on resources, you can't necessarily share how you did that. You also can't build on them. If you want to do something with that data, you sort of have to buy another off the shelf product. And then you're sort of stuck with what's out there. But most importantly, you inherit their exclusiveness. So the other databases often don't cover other languages. So that's obviously important in Canada, where a third of the publications are in French and don't get indexed. But even the 2/3 that are in English, half of that isn't getting in because it's too regionally important. And regionally important work often gets excluded from these databases. So you can't do anything to add those data sets, but you can, for instance, in OpenAlex, which is more inclusive, only look at the French work, only look at the English work, or exclude whatever you'd like. There's a really important question in the chat that I should talk about since we're on coverage. Great question. How do you avoid including papers from predatory journals? And the short answer is we don't. So the whole idea that these for-profit organizations are selling is that they curate what is quality research and what isn't. I just said that means, a lot of Canadian research that we think is really high quality isn't, for purposes that don't really make sense. But they do a really great job of excluding some of these predatory journals. We don't do that. In fact, it's not our goal to try and decide whether something is predatory. What we're trying to do is index everything and then allow people to make these sort of judgments. But it starts to get really interesting as soon as you try and understand that. So we've talked to many librarians around the world and tried to ask them how they define predatory. Some of them would say, well, it includes a lot of these Elsevier journals, but it also includes, on the other hand, things that are just fake journals with fake review, and there's that whole gamut. So everyone has a bit of a different definition there. Interestingly, though, if people want to study what's happening with behaviors of predatory journals, you can't do that in any database because no one's collecting that. And so we do have some universities around the world that are using OpenAlex with a list of journals that they call predatory, that they're trying to understand which of the researchers fell for that and why, and what they can do to sort of fix that. But we don't leave you with just, it's up to you to figure out what's predatory. Our approach is to create filters, and I can show them when we go in there, where you can filter out certain things. So a lot of people use DOAJ as a sort of quality filter for open research, and you can use that. It's something indexed in DOAJ. Another one is the CWTS core publications filter. So CWTS is a really large, well-respected bibliometric research group in Europe. And they've gone through OpenAlex to figure out what they think are the good quality journals. And then you can just toggle on yes or no to that. So great question, Birgit. Remind me if I don't get to it when I'm showing, I can show you how to do those filters. Okay, a couple quick more points on why being open is important. When things are open, you can build on them. So probably everyone in here has seen a graph like this one on the right in some paper or some library presentation, but it's from VOSviewer, which is a bibliometric open research tool. And historically, you had to go to whatever subscription you had, download the data, then import it into this tool, which sort of defeats their purpose of being open. But when we came around and had an open API, we worked with them to integrate it directly in there. So now you can build whatever analysis you want in OpenAlex and literally just copy and paste the URL at the top into VOSviewer to create the analysis that you want, and it will get the data for you. This is one example. I put it in here because I know a lot of librarians love VOSviewer, but there's a lot of other products around this in the world that are starting to be built off OpenAlex data because it's open. And just at the bottom here, I know it's a long link, but you'll have the slides. You can go to our YouTube channel as well. The creators of VOSviewer did a long demo on how to do specific VOSviewer analyses using OpenAlex data. So that's a great resource as well. And then one final point I want to make is that we do use algorithms just like all of the other tools to sort of classify work, to disambiguate work, but all of our algorithms are completely open and anyone can implement them on their own systems. This is important for a lot of reasons. So if you're reporting on the Sustainable Development Goals, for instance, but you want to know not just your publications, maybe your course curricula, you can run all your course curricula through our algorithm to figure out which courses are on a Sustainable Development Goal. Or as an example I chose, I went to the NSERC award database, and I looked at one of my PhD supervisor's grants, and I copy and pasted his description into our open classifier and said, what topics are these on? And you can see it classified it here. Impact of ocean acidification on marine ecosystems, metabolic theory of ecology and climate change impacts, species distribution. So these are things I know he works on, and I was like, wow, this is a great fit. But then if you go to those topics in OpenAlex and limit to Canada and group by author, you can see he comes up. So this is just another great way of showing when you use these open classifiers, you can connect all sorts of systems that aren't currently connected. Okay, so that's all the context I wanted to say around OpenAlex, and we're doing good on time. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the foundations, and then we'll go into OpenAlex after that. But please do keep the questions coming. I think I'm keeping up with them. I've got a big enough screen, and I can answer any questions as they come up. So with OpenAlex, there's 3 ways that you can really access the data. And the first one is our major differentiator. So we call this the snapshot. Anyone around the world can at any time, completely free, go and download the entirety of our data. We update this, right now we're doing it monthly, but we promise every quarter. So it's pretty up to date. It's a lot. I think it's 2 terabytes when it's just the metadata and not including the full text and things like that, but anyone can download that. And this is really important because advanced bibliometric groups, and I know there's a few in Canada, are actually ingesting that snapshot and running their own local version where you can do whatever you want with that data. And there's a lot of fun things you can do when you have access to the whole database that you just can't do otherwise. I'll give you one example I thought was really interesting. A researcher in Virginia was trying to understand how trade relations impact the flow of scientific knowledge, both through citations and collaborations. And he published this last year before anyone was really thinking about this, but basically showed which countries were citing one another and collaborating with one another, how that changes over time, and how specific trade policies between those nations shaped that. So I can't wait to see him repeat that 1 year later. But this is the type of thing, understanding the flow of knowledge globally, that you just can't do without access to this. So great that we have this data, but very few people are able to really work with the snapshot. So the next thing we developed was our open API. This is really, in my opinion, where all of our magic and our strength is. We have a very strong, well-documented API. Anyone around the world gets 100,000 free calls a day, up to 200 responses per call. So you're looking at 20 million responses or records a day for free. If you need more than that, it doesn't make sense to do that anyways. You really want the snapshot, but it's open and you can do anything you can imagine with an API. People have built derivative products. People have gone through and done specific citation analyses for their entire university. There's really cool things you can do. But still, most people aren't able to work with an API. And that's why we created the web interface. And I'm going to spend most of the time today looking at the web interface and showing you how to use that. But it's important to know that everything in the web interface is just an API call. We have API calls that feed our user interface. So anything you build in the user interface is something that's possible in the API. Just quickly pause to look at these questions. I hope OpenAlex is considering supporting library proxy and use of link resolvers. Okay, this is a really good question as well. So the way it works right now is you go in OpenAlex, you can find publications. And unpaywall is also one of our data sources. It's one of our products. If you're not familiar with unpaywall, the idea here is when a record exists, we go to 30,000 repositories around the world and try and figure out, is there a repository that's hosting a different version of this? So maybe it's closed at the publisher, but it's open in a repository. Then when you go to OpenAlex, you click and get the PDF regardless of where it's coming from. If it is open at source, then we go to that one first, but if not, you go to the green. So what ends up happening here is you don't actually ever need to have sort of an institutional logon. Anyone around the world gets the exact same thing. But if someone is logged in through their university's IP range because they're on campus or through an eProxy sort of authenticator, if they click on something that's closed, they'll still get access to it if they have access. But what we haven't done is another step requiring you to authenticate through your library, because that doesn't actually increase that value. And we've told people we're going to be open and not collect data on users. But in most cases, you won't have to. And I bring this up because we just had a library who tried to implement this. They wanted to put a layer over OpenAlex that says if anybody wants to look at OpenAlex, they have to go through our library proxy. But what ends up happening is that becomes a throttle point for our server where it says this one user is trying to use too much. So, we need to have a conversation with them. But then when we talked to them, they didn't realize that everyone on their campus was getting it for free, open, regardless. So interesting, and I'm happy to chat more about that as well. Yeah, Jason, good question on the local load. I'd be interested to know if anyone on this call is doing it as well. Okay, good questions. Regardless of how you're using it, the snapshot, the API, or the user interface, most of the workflow is very similar. Almost every use case you can do with a really simple flow of creating a logic layer or a query, basically. And we've got 54 different filters you can use: country, institution, specific terms, topics, open access type, license type. Like, you can do any of those filters to create your result set. And this is just a list of documents. You can export those. Sometimes that's the end. Sometimes people just want a list of their institution's works. But then you can also go a step further and group by any of those fields to do analyses on them. So for instance, I have all of our institutions' works, but now I want to group by author, or I want to group by topic to figure out which topics we're publishing the most in. So that's the workflow. How many API requests does OpenAlex fill per day? Good question, Eric, and good to see you on here. Right now we're at 20 million a day on average, which is quite high, but it's still well within what we're doing. Sometimes we have people who try and do really intensive things in the user interface or the API, and they get throttled, and they reach out to us and they don't realize that you're able to just download the whole database. So what we're trying to do now is make it easier for people who want the whole database to just know, hey, you can get this much faster if you just download it instead of going through the API calls. But yeah, good question. 20 million a day. Okay, a few examples that I'll show sort of screenshots of just to get you through that workflow, and then we'll go right into the user interface. So an example I hear a lot from countries and institutions that care about open access, so most of them now: how well are we progressing on our OA goals? And it's really as simple. You put in your filters. So here I put Australia as the country, and open access, true or false, and then group by publication year. And you can see, and this is the trend we see in most countries. When you look at individual institutions, it's often different. And I like doing this. So if you look at something like MIT, don't feel bad. There are leaders in this, and they've been decades ahead of everyone. So don't compare your institution to MIT, but you can compare your institution to other Canadian institutions and say, when we implemented this policy 5 years ago, what was the change compared to an institution that didn't? So some really interesting questions that you can ask there. And then everything I do, I always put the API call at the bottom just to get people a little bit more friendly with APIs and a little more warm to them. So you can see here, just group by publication year, authorship country, and then open access, true or false. Okay, another example is finding collaborators. So if any of you have supported your institution on a CFREF grant, for instance, and you're trying to find all the collaborators in a space, here's an example. So which institutions in New Zealand are working on gender equality in medicine? So I leverage the fact that gender equality is an SDG, concepts medicine or family medicine, country New Zealand. And you see I put author 1 to 10. I did this for two reasons. One, to show off another filter, but two, because some fields, particularly medicine and sort of particle physics, can have thousands of authors on them. And that means that everyone has collaborated, even if they have no idea that they collaborated. So sometimes you want to make the publication set a little bit more intimate. So these are the smaller collaborations so that you can find those folks. Question from Heather: do you pull data from university rankings, THE, to do the analyses? Good question, Heather. No, we don't pull data from rankings, but 3 rankings, at least 3 international reputable rankings that we know of, are using our data as their source. So most recently was a Time Higher Education released their interdisciplinary science ranking. That's based on OpenAlex data because, again, we have more interdisciplinary research in there. So it's a little bit more robust for that. Financial Times just last year switched their business school rankings to OpenAlex. And then most importantly, and the first in this group, I think, is the Open Layton rankings. So CWTS. There's always these initiatives that try to rank the rankings and figure out who's the most robust, the most ethical, most transparent, all of those. And CWTS is always the top of those lists. So we look to CWTS a lot, and they're now using our data as well. But we then don't pull back information to say this institution has this ranking. We do go a little bit further than just leave it there. So CWTS created these topics of research, and they're based on how everyone in the world is citing one another, these clusters. We ingested those so that if somebody wanted to look at their CWTS topics, they were able to. And like I said, you can toggle between what CWTS includes or not, but we're not trying to really focus on bringing in the ranking data. Good question, though. Then I think the last example I have here is sort of benchmarking. So as an example that was sent to me, how do countries compare in their publications relating to regenerative medicine over the past decade? So this was a group that was trying to make a pitch to the government to sort of say how these trends are changing over time. And you can see that the US over here in the top really ramped up very quickly in terms of the research output in regenerative medicine, but sort of plateaued when a lot of those investments dried up. But China, you can see here, really in the last few years has started to overtake them, and in the last year has overtaken them in terms of that output. All that you do here, I use the concept of regenerative medicine. Source type is journal. Work type is not paratext. I did this one again just sort of as a flex to show that it's another filter you can use. There are work types that maybe you don't want to include in your analyses, like the table of contents, for instance, or the cover page. You might say, why is that even in there? Actually, some people find that really helpful in their tenure and promotion to say, look, I was on the cover of this. So there are some things in journals that aren't journal articles that people do want to be able to find. So we leave them in there, but then let you filter it out. And then just group by publication year. Yeah, see, there's another question on how do you improve data quality? How do you disambiguate authors and institutions? How can authors do corrections? Great question. Okay, so data quality means a lot for us. And maybe I'll go through a couple of the common examples. So disambiguating authors and institutions, we have custom designed algorithms that go through the text that we get that represent those. So we call this affiliation strings. Like I wrote the Department of Zoology at the University of British Columbia. Maybe I spelled it wrong, but we have that text. And then we try and match that algorithmically to ROR records. And this is one of the examples I show later because I want everyone to look at the ROR record. And then we do have a pipeline. It's called the Works Magnet that was developed by the French government that lets you make suggestions to that and fix it in OpenAlex. If it's particularly bad, like it's not just 100 or so examples, but we've missed an entire the algorithm isn't working on a specific institution. And I'll give you a great example of one. So one was Western University, changed names multiple times. And anytime a university just has a geographic name in it, there are lots of them around the world. So we worked with them to write some special rules that fixed our algorithm. So there's a few different ways of doing that. Authors is the same idea, except with authors, there isn't necessarily a gold set like there is with ROR for institutions. We can talk about ORCID if you want in a moment, sort of separate conversation, but there isn't. So we create these author clusters, and those are always needing improvement. We have known areas that we do pretty well in and known areas that we don't do well at all. And we're trying to figure out how to implement those. But data quality is something that we think about every day. We think about ourselves as trying to create this municipal water system. We're not trying to do anything too fancy, but we're trying to make sure that scholarly metadata flows from where it needs to get to where it's going. And we're trying to create that piping. And nobody wants to drink the water if it's contaminated and poisoned. So we have to make sure we're getting data from the right sources, treating it in the way that we need to, and getting it to people as they want. And it's super complicated, but it's what we spend most of our time thinking about. I can talk more about that if you have specific questions. But I will show, I think, can you see where I'm in a new tab now? Okay, great. If you go to help.openalex.org at any time, this is our knowledge base. So we can't respond to every support request because we get thousands and we're a 5-person team. But if something is asked and it's really important to a lot of people, we do try and create a knowledge base so that you can find it. So errors is one, like for instance, if I type in errors and spell it right, you can see there's a few things. So how do I fix errors? How do I do author profiles? If I click on this, it'll walk you through links of the different things you can do. So author profiles, how you can fix those, source profiles, works, and more on the institution. So that's where you can go for that information. And yeah, specifically to your follow-up question, Holly, yes, this is what you would do. So right now for authors, there's only 4 things that you can do. You can change how they display their name. You can merge 2 profiles. You can remove works to a profile, or you can add them. That usually will fix all the problems. If it's more complicated than that, then you should write to us. But if you can fit it in these curation forms, it will get resolved within 2 weeks. If you can't, it might take a lot longer because it needs our time to be able to get to it. But good questions. Okay, I'm not going to go through this slide, but I wanted you to have it for later as you're starting to do your own thing. You can see I put on this first column some common use cases, and then how you would set that up in OpenAlex. So the filters you might use, the group bys you might use, and then additional things to consider, just to show you that really almost everything falls through that same logic. Okay, so with that, I think we're good on time. I'm going to go directly into openalex.org now, but please do keep the questions coming. And as I'm going through, feel free to put questions in the chat and I can specifically show what you're asking. Okay, so I'll just quickly show openalex.org. Anyone around the world can do this. You can also do this on your phone. We haven't spent a lot of time sort of making it perfect on someone's phone because it's a complicated thing to do, but feel free to use it and try it out and give us feedback. But when you come here, it's really, there's not very much on this website. And I want to point out a couple things first. So the first thing you're meant to see is the search bar where you can search anything. But if you scroll down, here's where you can get more information. So you want to understand our sustainability plan. You want to understand what we mean by open to top to bottom. And I did say that all of our data is open for anyone. It's under a CC0 license, but actually 100% of our source code is also open access. So you can read more about that. You can read our source code, our data, whenever you need to. And then there's more information here like privacy and press if you want to read us in the news, that kind of thing. The other thing I want to point out is up at the top, you'll see there's sort of a login. You do not have to log in ever to use OpenAlex. And that's really important to us. But if you want to save searches or claim your author profile to be able to make direct edits to it, or set up an alert to get new emails every time your search changes, then you need to sign up. But you don't have to otherwise. But from this main page, you can do sort of many things. So we gave you some examples. You can type an author name. You can type Boolean combined search terms. You can type one of our filters. I'm just going to do as an example Kyle Demes, and you can see I've got a unique name. So it pulls up author at Simon Fraser University, and you can hit enter. You can also see that it's saying, do you want to search this in the work title and abstract? With a name, that doesn't really make sense, but if you're searching something else, you could do that. Or at any point, you can just hit enter and just skip that and see all of the research in there at once. So you can see now it's showing 265,800,000 results. It rounds to 4 significant figures. It's not that perfect number, but that's sort of the entire database at the moment. Regardless of what you search, you're going to get 2 sort of different things. On the left are all of the publications that match that. Right now, it's just all the publications in the database. And then on the right are these group bys or analyses that I mentioned earlier. So with the works themselves, you can sort of change how they're being sorted. So you can see you can sort by title, year, citation percentiles, field-weighted citation impact. If you search a term, you can also do relevance. So if I do like health ecology, the default now is to search by relevance to that term search, but then you do have the other opportunities there. At any point, this top magic search bar operates the exact same way as that front page was. So I could go back and type in Kyle Demes, and you'll see it's bringing up authors. If I click on that, it's giving me all the publications by this author profile. And you can see if I click here, you can actually get access to that author profile. You can see, yes, there is an ORCID associated with it that's been connected. The total number of works, my previous affiliations, you can look at that author profile. But I'm going to go back and do works for a moment. So here you can export results. You can export up to 100,000 at a time. That's not because we're trying to hide the data. it just becomes a very massive file and takes a long time to populate a CSV like this. So if you do need something bigger than that, we usually recommend APIs or the snapshot. But 100,000 at a time is still pretty good. You can see we've got .csv. A lot of librarians will try and open these CSVs in Excel, and just a point to say, some of our data cells have more characters in them than Excel will let you open because there will be thousands of authors. And I think Excel's limit's like 32,767 characters. It's something very specific like that. And if you exceed it, it starts to bleed through and it does weird things. So we have this shortened column values for Excel compatibility. So if you click that, it's going to reduce some of those really big cells, but it does let you open it in Excel. There's also a text format and a RIS for sort of EndNote or other platforms you might be using. For any of these, you can see right now the default is by citation. So if I click on one of these works, it's going to give you information about that work. So this is a closed access one. You can see closed. Maybe I'll find an open one. This is an open one that was gold, so I can go directly to the website or to the PDF. If you find an old one that's green, actually, do I even have a green one? This is a good time to check that. So I'm just going to go over on stats, and I'm going to add something that isn't on here called open access status. I do have some green publications. So you can see that there's a version of these that are in a repository somewhere. This one, obviously it makes sense. This is Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. So this is one of the open preprint repositories. And you can see this one as well. So for all of those, it's going to link to that repository version. Okay, I'm just looking at the question. So Robert asking, did you say you can claim an author profile? Yes, good question, Robert. So the way that works is in your author account. Right now it is temporarily disabled because we're trying to integrate it with our new curation pipeline. But you can see mine, I claimed mine before we disabled it, but this is what it will look like. You'll essentially go to an author profile, and when you're at it, there'll be something up here that if you're signed in, you'll be able to claim. You can only claim one profile. So once you claim one, I mean, you can unclaim it, but you have to link other profiles if you need to merge them. Good question, Robert. Okay, is there anything else I want to say on those? I mean, the other thing that's important to say, you can change the number that are on per page. Otherwise, you just toggle through to keep getting those. One thing I do want to add that I haven't said yet is everything on this user interface, the API call is basically populated up here. So you can see there's authorship ID, you can see publication year, open access. These are all things that I've told it to do here. And the nice part about that is you can build exactly what you want in this user interface and share it with someone. So let's say I don't want to see the works themselves. I'm going to go up here and I can turn off the results list, and it's just giving me the stats that I want. But let's say you want different stats than this. So I want to look at my co-authors as well. I'm going to add group by authors. I'm going to add APC sum. I'm going to add maybe the citation sum. So the total number of citations of all these works. Maybe I want to look at the sustainable development goals. You can see that I think there's about 50 of these in here that you can look at. Maybe I want to look at source, where they're published in. So I publish a lot in Journal of Phycology. That's the study of seaweeds. That was sort of my background. So you can see that here. I've got two things that are in archive that aren't yet published in another source. So all of this, and then you can go up here to share, and you can get a QR code if you want. So anyone in the audience who's following, they could click on, they could go to this page right now and it will show them the exact page that I've constructed. Alternatively, you can just copy and paste the URL at the top. Okay, if you ever do something like this, you can keep the URL, but you can also save it. So you can see up here, you have the opportunity to save things. I have some examples here, like demo for kelp ecology. I use that a lot. UTAS marine example. So this is a small interdisciplinary department of marine ecologists that were at in this specific group, and I made a group out of them, and then now you can analyze all of their works. You can create an alert from this to get a new email anytime someone is publishing a new paper, and it has all the specific things that we were looking at. Okay, so I'm going to go back just to openalex.org. Okay. Let's see, there's some questions coming through that I've been ignoring. Okay, sorry, there's a few of them. Possible, yes. So it looks like the only date is record is the year of publication. Good question, Emily. So that's an important thing. Let me go back to my profile to show you as an example. We do have publication date and publication year in our fields. Most commonly, people are looking for year, so you can see the year on here. You could add year as a field, but if you do need it for some reason, and you know what, I should have just shown this anyways. Anytime you do something on this web page, you can actually see the information that we think you want to see. We think this is the common information, but if you click API, you're going to see all the information we have on that record. And if you can see, we have a lot of metadata in that record that we're not exposing you to. So you could search date, for instance, and you can see the publication date is here. So you are able to get that information. And this is, again, why I think the API is so much more powerful than the user interface, because the API, you can get everything. A couple really important points on date that I should point out while I'm here. We do publication dates differently than some of the other databases. A lot of the other databases will use as default the print publication date of something, of the issue that it's in, so the bibliographic date as the publication date. We don't. We use the first of, I think there's 14 different possible dates that something can be published. We use the first of those. So the first time it's become online available, if that's there, or the first time it's in press, or the first time it's on a website, that becomes the date. So sometimes you will see differences. Usually they're the same year. Sometimes they're a year delayed, but I've seen some that are 3 to 4 years difference. So that can be a really important thing to keep in mind. As long as you're consistent with which website you're using or which database, that's fine. But if you try and do comparisons, that's one reason why you might not be able to find them. Okay, good question. Thank you. I'm glad you asked. Are there plans to improve coverage of publication types other than journal articles? Good question. Okay, so you can see the types that I publish are not that diverse. We've got articles, preprints, reviews, and erratum. But if you take me out of this and look at types globally, you can see all the different types that we index. So articles, book chapters, data sets, preprints, dissertations, book review, paratext, libguides, sort of go all the way through. Our intention is to be as diverse here as possible, but there are some things that we're intentionally not yet indexing. So DataCite, for instance, is one of our sources, and they do have things that are much more diverse than this, like physical objects or art exhibitions. The coverage of those right now is really low, and the metadata standards aren't at a level yet where we've decided that's a priority. But as those become more and more important, we do want to start getting the diverse scholarly knowledge in here. But yeah, you can see with books already, we've got 5.6 million, 5.7 million, and we do want to continue expanding that. Books become particularly challenging for us because the metadata standards aren't the same. Sometimes authors never put an affiliation anywhere in their book. So there's little things like that we have to sort of figure out what to do with. But data sets as well, and yeah, we'll continue being more and more expansive with that. Oh, goodness. Okay, great. Lots of questions. Have you considered integrating AI features like LLMs to support semantic search in OpenAlex? Yes, definitely. Most of the people we talk to want us to spend more time making very specific requests. The academic and particularly the library knowledge synthesis community wants to have really specific, precise control over language. And there's a lot of pushback on those approaches. But we are trying to figure out how to do both of them. So we will be doing things, and we're already working on this, where you can type what you're looking for and it will create the query and show you the query it's created to give you the results you're looking for. So that there's a little bit more transparency, but you don't have to learn the query language. I'd say that's still a few months from being launched, but that is definitely something that we'll be doing. The other piece to that is AI embeddings of research. So you find an article and you want to find the most closely related in terms of text similarity. That's something that will be AI guided. Or you'll be able to type in any text you want and find the most closely related research or author. So those are all things we're absolutely working on. Can you make pages like this for institutions as well? Yeah, Katie, sorry, I probably should have started with an institution instead of just focusing on myself. I do this too much. I pick on SFU because they're literally right outside my window, but you can search any institution in here and then you will get the same sort of idea, all of the works from that publication and whatever stats you want to group by. This is a good time to say how we match our institutions. So I mentioned earlier that we do algorithmic matching. So all of that comes down to what's in your ROR. So I'm just going to click on this to show you what an institutional profile looks like. You can see there are some child institutions in here. Bamfield, Canadian Statistical Sciences Institute, PICS, PKP. There's probably quite a bit more than that. We get all this information from ROR and we link to ROR on the profile so that you can really quickly go to see it. A really good thing for everyone here to do is look at your university's ROR record. Just quickly, are there alternate names that are missing that need to be added? Sometimes it's really helpful if there's a name in both languages. Is the location wrong? Is the website wrong? Are there child organizations that need to be added? Now, I'll spend a quick moment on this because this is really important for bibliometrics. Sometimes researchers will publish with Public Knowledge Project, for instance, as their affiliation and not mention SFU at all. When that happens, the only way we know that SFU wrote that paper is if we know that it's under there. So if there are some institutes or some centers at your university that have these specific names, and sometimes researchers don't put your university, make the suggestion. You can see at the bottom, you can suggest a change here. Don't worry, you don't have to go through political conversations at your university around what this profile should look like. You don't have to get everything right the first time, but if you see something missing, you can just suggest that change now. They have a group that reviews those changes, so you can't just make a change that doesn't make sense. It has to follow those guidelines, but they do rely on people making those suggestions. So please take a look, go fix that, because it immediately helps OpenAlex, but also every other downstream provider that uses ROR. And that list grows every day. So journals in the future will not allow you to write raw affiliation strings. You'll have to pull down, and some of them already do this, where your ROR is. And if your ROR isn't there, institutions won't know what to do. So please spend 10 minutes or whatever looking through that. It will benefit your university everywhere.
Kyle, I'm
So
wondering,
yes,
since you mentioned ROAR, can you talk? There was a question before about ORCID, but it disappeared. Can you just talk a little bit about how OpenAlex works with ORCID?
yes, sorry that I missed that. And thank you for
No,
bringing.
no, maybe it got deleted or something from, but I
Yeah.
missed it.
Okay, so I mentioned that we have a direct matching with ROR and we use ROR as a gold truth for all institutions. That doesn't exist for people. And the reason why is because there's no registry that is a PID for all people who engage in research. There is ROR, which is a very important piece in this ecosystem, but it doesn't have every researcher. It's not updated at the same degree. But very importantly, I want to stress this, when somebody puts an ORCID on their publication, that hasn't been verified historically. And so there's a lot of errors in other things about ORCID. I'm not saying there's errors in ORCID, but obviously there's some there as well. There's errors everywhere. But when you have a publication, there's a lot of errors in that name to ORCID matching that make it really difficult for us to trust that information. We did try last year having a direct integration with ORCID, and it actually broke more of our author profiles than it fixed. Not just because at the publication it's wrong, but then the publication has to send that metadata to Crossref, to DataCite. And sometimes there's encoding errors where the same ROR or ORCID gets added to every single author, or it gets flipped. Like the ORCID that should have been on Thane's name is on my name, and the ORCID that should have been on my name went to Thane. And so it really quickly in other scholarly infrastructure isn't a verified source. And so we don't use it to pull data. And when I worked at Scopus, it was the same thing. They weren't using it as a source of disambiguating people. But you could, use your Scopus profile and soon your OpenAlex profile to populate your ORCID. So good, I'm glad you asked that because I know it's on a lot of people's minds. It's a really common question we get from ORCID member institutions where they say, my university required us to go through and manually curate our ORCID. Why isn't it in any other system? And that's the reason is when you attach your ORCID to a publication, there isn't a verification process. There isn't much these other institutes can, or these other organizations can do to use that data reliably. But this is now a good time to talk about just general community curation of open metadata. Right now, I know every university is spending librarian time, sometimes subscription money, to clean these other databases. And there's a big project. It was just submitted as part of the CFI Innovation Fund from Simon Fraser University in collaboration with California Digital Library, in collaboration with OpenAlex and all these other providers to say, when something gets fixed in OpenAlex, how do we push it upstream to fix the errors in ISSN, in Crossref, in DataCite, in ORCID, and ROAR? So that's a really exciting movement that I think is coming. And once we can get a little bit more of that verification throughout the system, then I hope it will be that if you populate your ORCID, it will get into all these other downstream tools. Ooh, okay, yeah, thanks. Okay, there's a question. Oh, it looks like she's responding to Pierre Emmanuel. APC sums, okay. I guess there are limits to the accuracy. Yeah, good point. And Emily, I intentionally chose that APC because somebody wrote in and asked about that. The best way to start here, I think, is if you go to that help.openalex.org and you type in APC. Oops. Hold on, my computer's stuck on something. But if I just type in APC, where we get the metadata from and how to estimate fees for my institution. And the reason I point you here is because there are a lot of things that go into making this estimate. And we worked closely with Stephanie Hochstein and some researchers in the US to figure out what the best instructions we could give to universities are on how to do this. I went to BRIC last year, and I think there were 7 or 8 different presentations from different universities who spent a semester doing different processes to figure out what their thing was, or what their APC estimates were. And what we tried to do with Stephanie and this other group in the Big Ten is figure out what could we do that could be standard, that would have some errors that are known, but everyone could do. And the workflow is really simple. So use corresponding institution filter and select your institution, add filter type article or review, add primary location is journal, and then add APC sum. And then we do have, if you follow here, a list of some of the assumptions that go into it. And sometimes those assumptions underestimate the value and sometimes they overestimate. And the idea is that at large, this will give you decent estimates, but it is important to read through some of this. But just as an example, you can click here. And now it's got sort of that workflow for Simon Fraser University. You could then get rid of Simon Fraser University and type in University of Victoria, for instance, and it's going to replicate that analysis. So good question. Where is it coming from? Okay, so that's in that documentation for understanding the assumptions. OpenAPC is one of our main sources, but OpenAPC does not have anywhere near the number of records that we would need to be able to use this feature. So we also use, when we don't have OpenAPC for that article, we try and understand for that article published in this year at this journal under this license type, what would they have paid? Because we know that they have paid, what was the list price? And then we make estimates based on that. There is another source, so a lot of that information comes from DOAJ, but we also have a list that someone has gone through and manually curated of the APC prices for a lot of these journals. So good questions. And yes, Joanne, I definitely agree, support OpenAPC. I think the more that universities put their data in OpenAPC, the more accurate their analyses will be. Because all of the analyses that I'm showing here, they don't take into account your transformational agreements if you haven't put it in OpenAPC. So something to consider there. Okay, I made it through the questions, great. We have a little bit more time, so I have a couple other things I was going to show, but please do keep the questions coming. Let me go back to the slides and see. We can do one on collaborative intelligence. Let me see what that looks like. Okay, so when people are doing collaborative intelligence, this is one I got asked about as well. You sort of select your level of collaboration. So I'm going to start here with Canada, maybe. And then you might want to understand what countries Canada is collaborating with. So filter Canada and then group by country. This is now showing our Canadian collaborations. If I wanted to know, for instance, what topic people in these collaborations are studying, you could click France, see it adds it up here. And now we have the topics that they're collaborating on. And it's the same general workflow. What I didn't show is that right now I've added a second row here for France, and this means the country is Canada and the country is France. I could say Germany, for instance. And now what I'm doing is saying Canadian publications and the country is either France or Germany. And you could build something more complex if you want. You could add 30 specific countries, but you can narrow it down from there. A lot of these are, you can see particle physics, that's not uncommon. So maybe I'll show the authors count. So let's say here it's got to have, 1 to 10 authors. And now you can see the topics of collaboration are not mostly astrophysics. There are still some where there's smaller collaborations, but there's some other topics as well. Are you considering adding the ability to use month and year? So this is a good question, Debbie. You can do this because we have publication date, but in a capital BUT, there's a lot of challenges with publication date. Just quickly, when journals are submitting metadata on when something is published, they don't always put a day and they don't always put a month. So if you take all of the publications in a database, any of them, Ours, Dimensions, Scopus, whatever, you'll see these sort of peaks where January 1st always has a ton of publications. That's because there was not necessarily any month or date, and then the system created by default January 1st with the year that they provided. Or they'll provide a month but not a day, and then the first day of that month. So you find these like huge peaks. So I say that very intentionally to say, if you're looking for fiscal cutoffs, that's something to keep in mind. If you're just trying to create something that's standard for reporting, you could do that same thing every single year and it'll sort of come out in the wash. But if the actual date is important, and I know there's some use cases in Canada where they're looking at the date of publication versus patent dates, you want to make sure there's a lot more scrutiny into what that date actually means. Yeah, good question. Oh yeah, Emily, thank you. It's available in the API, but it's not in the user interface currently. But yes, if you download the CSV, you get, I think it's 120 columns or something like that with all of the metadata fields that are available. So everything I showed you in a specific work, all of these fields, I click pretty print so you can see it. There's going to be a separate column for each of these because everything gets exported. Yeah, good questions. Okay, that was an example. There was another question specifically to show language, and I haven't done that yet, but this is just another one of the features. You can either add it here as a filter, so you could type in language and then select from the languages. So you can say, give me just the French ones. Or if you add it over here, you can see what languages people are publishing under. So language. So maybe I'll get rid of some of this. So now you're starting with Canada and looking at the language of publication there. Birgit, thank you. I meant to show this and I didn't. Show us how to get rid of dubious content. So dubious will be sort of how you define it. We don't have a filter that says dubious, but we do have a couple filters that are really important to think about. The first that I'll show is retracted. So I just typed retracted up here and you can see, you could also go to this blue and look at retracted. When you do this, it shows all the retracted works with a Canadian author. But usually you want, show me all the publications that have not been retracted. So this is one thing you might want to do pretty regularly in your analyses. Some people actually are really interested in understanding what works have been retracted and why and where they're coming from. So it's in there. But the other two I mentioned that are really important are DOAJ. So is the journal that it's published in indexed in DOAJ? And then the last one is CWTS. So these are sort of the three filters that people are using. Our goal with OpenAlex is that we're going to add more and more of these filters. So if a community of practice comes together and decides this is a specific filter that would be interesting and more very useful for the world, we want to put that in there. So if Canada comes together and says these are the dubious sources, exclude them, we'll put Canadian dubious sources, or something like that, because we want to make it easy for folks to do that. Yeah, that's a good question. Oh, the last thing I didn't get through that somebody asked, and maybe I'll do that. It's a good time. We can do more examples, and I'm happy to. But someone asked, looking forward, where we're going with OpenAlex. I do have a couple of quick bullet points to talk on this so you know where we're going. Right now, we're in the middle of a guts code rewrite. We're completely rewriting the way that we do OpenAlex. The reason we're doing this is because we built it off a model thinking that Crossref and MAG were going to be our two main sources. But it turns out there's a lot more publications that we're not getting. Things from Medra, CKNI, OJS, where they're not getting DOIs at all, some DataCite ones, JALC. We think that we're probably about halfway to our goal of the world's knowledge, but every time we add a new database, it gets incrementally more and more difficult. So we're doing a complete rewrite to make it easy to get all of these data sources. The next step from that is to start minting works directly from institutional repositories. So if your institutional repository does a great job with metadata works and you've started doing things like art exhibitions and things like that, we'll be able to mint a work from that. That's probably the phase 2 of that, but that's a big project we're on right now. We just announced, I guess last week, that we're doing private betas of our first analytics platform. Everything I've showed right now is based off of really simple search and then group by. And this is all based on Elasticsearch. It's cheap, it's fast, it's easy, but it can't do really specific things like show me all of the people who did their PhD at the University of Alberta, but now work at an institution within India and have collaborated with this person and were funded by the Chinese government. You just can't do really complex things like that, but this does and will. So if anyone's interested, this will be a major focus over the next year, but we do have the private beta that will start working with institutions probably next month. I think May 1st is when that will launch. So let me know if you want to be part of that. A lot of people mentioned community curation. I did mention that big project we're excited about. So they're called Comment and Rich. They're both cute acronyms that have to do with enriching metadata and collaboratively. But that's a big thing we're working on. And then the last piece, we find out at the end of next month if we're getting a large grant to become the best and open funding metadata database. So the idea here is that we'd be working directly with governments and funders around the world, as well as with every other open source we can find, to create an open grant funding database and link it to all the publications. Right now, some of this is in OpenAlex, but it only gets in through Crossref or PubMed, and we think together those are probably 0.5% of all of the grants. So this will be another major project we work on this year. Okay, so we do still have a little bit more time. So if there's other use cases people want me to go through, I do want to point out in the slides, there's additional information and additional resources, so take a look at that. But I also included some more advanced examples of how people are using OpenAlex data that I think are pretty interesting to look at. CollabNext is it's a US open source tool that helps HBCU, so historically Black colleges and universities, find research partners based on topics. It's based on our data. The Works Magnet is this open curation tool of our string matching algorithm. The CWTS rankings dashboard, which I showed you, where you can compare OpenAlex to the Leiden versions. Really important for a lot of librarians. This collections analysis script. We know that a lot of librarians want to go through and figure out every publication that is at their university and what it's citing and how well that lines up with their specific collections management. So we went ahead and wrote a script that does it. And you don't have to learn coding. You can actually just copy and paste. You just have to change the institution ID. So for this one, we use University of Tasmania, and it will give you two CSV files, one with all of the references, all of your publications at University of Tasmania, and the other with every single paper referenced within them in the journal, so that you can do analyses by which journals your researchers are using. So it's another cool thing you can look at. The Danish research portal, I show this as an example of what some countries can do. We haven't yet in Canada, but there's definitely some talks of creating one. And then Canada's Secure Scholar. I don't know if people know about this, but the U15 created a tool that automates a lot of the research security bibliometric due diligence analyses using OpenAlex data. So that's another good thing to look at. Christine, good question. So can you explain the field-weighted citation impact? Yes, let me go back as an example. So if I go to openalex.org, I'm going to go to Kyle Demes again. I mentioned that you can filter or sort by field-weighted citation impact. So for any publication that you go to, you'll see it's one of the fields here. And if you go into the API, you can get it there as well. That's calculated the exact same way that SciVal calculates it, where we try and come up with two numbers, an observed number of citations, and that's how many citations it actually received. And then on the denominator, how many we expected it to based on the subfield, the document type, and the publication year. And this is a way that you can sort of normalize to make comparisons across different disciplines. We use the same calculation. We also use the same ASJC subfields. But a really important difference between us is that we don't use subfields at the journal level. SciVal does journal level considerations of what an article is about. So a journal editor says, we publish in these 2 or 3 subfields. We instead say, we want to know the actual publication to compare publications to one another. But otherwise, it's exactly the same. And there is, if you go to help.openalex, I think we have documentation in here as well. Yeah, that walks through sort of where that's coming from. Oh, and this is great. So this even walks through exactly how we did it, where our documentation is, why some works don't have that. So hopefully that is helpful. Is there a way to group APC sums by publisher? So say SFU. Good question, Eric. So in the user interface right now, you see when I add APC, it adds to the end APC summary. So for every API call you make, if you add APC sum to that, you'll get those values. So what people are doing now is they're writing R codes. And I've got a great example of a librarian at UNC who's never coded before, who wrote using ChatGPT an R code that would do exactly this in R. She said, I want to be able to break down the APC sums by year, by publisher for my institution, and I need it in this table. And she wrote the R code that was able to do that. And that was really exciting for us to see because it's a big learning curve for a lot of people to get into APIs, but because our API is well documented and it's open, ChatGPT and some of these LLMs are actually very easy for you to go from never having coded before to something like a custom data set or analysis. But I think it sounds like the next journal club at Carl is going to be talking about that. Do you calculate premature field-weighted citations for very young articles? So yes, I mean, this is one of the concerns with field-weighted citation impact as a metric in general. You can calculate it the second it's published. It's usually 0 because it has 0 citations. As soon as it gets 1 citation, you can do that. In the first year, field-weighted citation impact can change a lot. From year 1 to year 2, it doesn't really change much at all. From year 2 to year 3, it's almost never changing. Now, there is also this concern where 10 years later, the article might start getting cited, and field-weighted citation impact doesn't include any of that. That's a whole nother conversation we could have, but there was a decision made a long time ago to only use the first 3 years after something is published. But yes, and those should be getting updated. Yeah, good question. I'll say, I guess while you're here, we intentionally left off data sets from field-weighted citation impact. The reason we did that is most data sets never get cited, ever, and then some of them get cited a lot. And the problem is that it's so disproportionate, where some get cited 1,000 times and then 99% never get cited, that the ones that do get cited a lot can actually change the entire ranking of institutions. So we intentionally made a decision right now to not include that, but it's something we might do in the future.
Kyle, can I just jump in? I have a question. As you're talking about FWCI, I'm wondering, and I'm going to put you on the hot seat here. Sorry, if you would be at all interested in working with like our community of librarians and developing new indicators. or maybe better indicators to measure impact or other indicators? Is there any interest from OpenAlex in doing something like that? And you can just say, I'll need to think about that. I'll get back to you if you don't want to
No.
answer.
But yeah, good question. So we introduced field-weighted citation impact very intentionally because governments and universities that have signed Barcelona Declaration have said, here's a list of things that we need to be able to switch to an open alternative. And field-weighted citation impact was one of the most common. And that's because it's used in rankings, boards of governors use it, treasury boards in some places use it, but they've become really hooked on that. And so that was a development priority for us. We have a long backlog of things that we want to do, and they sort of get prioritized when people say this is what we need to make the switch. So I'm saying that to put in your head, absolutely there's appetite. When it can be framed as this is what we need to make the switch, that's very helpful. Some of the things we've been talking about are interdisciplinary metrics. People want to see a lot of those. Policy citation metrics. People here might know Overton. There's also another competitor to Overton that is just launching, and both of those use OpenAlex as their source of the academic or scholarly metadata. So we're talking to them about bringing in the counts, but they're closed proprietary products. So you'd have to go to their product if you wanted more than the counts, but then we could have counts and citation metrics based on that. But yes, there's definitely opportunity to have all sorts of things developed. And after this guts code rewrite is done, which should be soon, these things are very simple to develop typically. I mean, field weighted citation impact took us 2 weeks. I think it took us a week to come up with the fields and then a week to write the calculation. So we do want to increase the usability of these tools. So absolutely. Any reasonable and responsible author metric? Good question, Birgit. I personally don't think any metric is reasonable or responsible at the level of an author. One of the really tragic parts about bibliometrics is that as soon as people put them in rankings, the idea is to rank institutions, but inevitably institutions aren't thinking, what can we do to better support our researchers to get to this? They instead drill it down to an individual researcher. And even when I worked at SciVal, people would say all the time, we would say at SciVal, please never use field-weighted citation impact for an individual researcher. It still got used all the time. We had an argument with Johnson & Johnson, who was evaluating early career researchers by their field-weighted citation impact. Some of them only had 2 or 3 publications. We say you need at least 1,000 before you start aggregating. So anyways, I say all this because I don't actually think that there are many reasons why drilling down a metric, either from an article to a person or an institution to a person, ends up being reasonable or responsible. I think in a lot of the conversations I have with governments that want to do that, I try and pivot them away to say, what are you trying to achieve here? And really, I think the most valuable and where this field is going, the most valuable use of this type of data is not to evaluate individuals, but instead to evaluate policies. So we implemented this policy for open access. Did it change that? If not, why? Not saying we implemented this open access policy, which of our researchers is publishing in open access? Because that just creates that same game that everyone learns to use. So sorry, I know I just went on a bit of a soapbox there. Yeah, I mean, arithmetic means for field-weighted citation impact is a really good point. It's a super long tail, and we know that the means are not serving most of the use cases, but it's still what's used. We did talk about whether or not we would put in median field-weighted citation impact, but instead of doing that, the new analytics platform will let you do any on-the-fly calculation. So you could put in any function you want. You could say, give me the 93rd percentile or give me the median. But yeah. Oh, good. Thanks, Jeffrey. I wasn't sure if everyone agreed with what I was saying about author level metrics. You never see people's faces. Yeah, great. Thank you, Emily. So I think we're probably at time, but I think one thing I want to say sort of in closing is it's open. Please play around with it and don't hesitate to reach out. I did say that we can't always respond to everyone in our support, and that is absolutely true. But I'll put my email in here. It's just Kyle at OurResearch.org. I can usually get to most questions, and obviously I'm Canadian and love to interact with more Canadian institutions. So please feel free to reach out. And thanks again for Talene and Thane for organizing.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot, Kyle. And I just did want to ask you one more thing. If you remember when those new features, when you finish doing, what is it called? Your gut something or the other, the rebuild, I don't know, you're doing something big. When that's done, and also when that author profile system, I know many librarians will be interested in knowing when that happens. If you remember, no pressure. If you can send an email out to our listserv, I know people will want to know more about that. And okay, with that, I think we're done. Thanks everyone for coming. And again, the session was recorded, so we'll be sending it out to everyone. And yeah, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your day. And I hope the weather turns more spring or summer like wherever you are, unless you're in Australia, because then it's, I don't know, is the opposite of whatever we're doing here. Okay, great. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.